hardworking gallery people, Madeline, Susan, Brian, they're all down there for all the installation. I'm not any part of the hanging of the work. And it's always a surprise to see what it looks like, you know, not only when it's hanging on a wall, but when it's arranged in this way, you know, in groups, because each painting was a moment of life, of real life. And when I was painting it, that was the only thing in the world, you know, was that moment. And then when I finished, when I'm bored with that moment, I really never look at that painting again. And here they are now, they're people, you know, paintings that never spoke to each other before next to each other. It's so interesting to me. I mean, why is a sheep looking at a lavender field? Anyway, but it's just, I think she's done a beautiful job, you know, arranging them in groups. Okay, so this, we call this show, what did we call it? Field of Vision. Okay. Which basically means, you know, your field of vision is just whatever you see when your head isn't moving, whatever you see in front of you. I mean, that's just a very generic term for I paint what I see. It's whatever is in my field of vision. Of course, it isn't actually the whole field of vision, because the field of vision is very large, and most of it is your peripheral vision, and the only thing you can really see is the 15 degrees of your macula, or maybe the 5 degrees that fall on your fovea or something. So it's a very narrow range. It's not really the whole field of vision, but it's just a you know, a phrase that implies that I'm painting what I see, which is, of course, everything I've painted is something that's actually in front of me while I'm seeing it. So the painting is the experience of seeing and of perception. It's not a memory. It's not, God forbid, a photograph. It's not an imagination. I have no imagination. It's simply, it's in front of me. I'm engaging with it. That's putting it nicely. It's more like, you know, a kind of a wrestling match of you know, trying to figure out what the heck it is. But anyway, it's in front of me. And because of the, you know, you really don't see, you see out of focus in the periphery of your vision. I stand pretty far away from the things I'm painting so that they occupy a narrow angle of vision. And that way I can actually see it, and I can see it without moving my head all over the place. You know, so I don't generally take a scene where I have to look from here to here. You know, I just have to see the whole thing at once. So I guess that implies a certain distance, but I mean, it's a physically measurable distance, like a certain number of meters away. But it's not miles away unless it's a landscape. Okay, so there's not a unity of motif or subject matter. I mean, I really don't know what subject matter is. I just paint colors and shapes, and I don't mean that to be facetious or anonymous. It's just that I'm not really interested in the narrative content of the things I see. I am stimulated, because I live in a visual world, because I'm a painter, I'm just stimulated by the colors and shapes and patterns that I can be involved with when I open my eyes. And, you know, there's chaos in the world, and if I can kind of hone in on a small little area of complexity and find some kind of order in it, it makes me really feel good about the world, because otherwise it's just a big veil of tears and mess. So, you know, I'm very happy to find some little area where I can find beauty and structure, and I can participate in that. You know, in the process of painting is the process of finding order and structure in some mysterious thing that's in front of me. So, you know, I don't select, I'm trying to say, don't select the subjects for their narrative content. I mean, you know, melons, they don't have a particular meaning for me other than the fact that, you know, we absolutely live off them for the entire month of August in the south of France. You can't have one meal that doesn't have a melon in it, because they're at their moment. You know, they're ripe for 3 weeks. That's it, and you just, you know, after that, there's no point in me ever eating a melon again. So I see melons every day, and every time you cut into one of those green things and open it up, and this is orange sunshine just explodes. Okay, but it's not really about melons. It's simply about what happens to these orange pieces sort of geometric pieces of a sphere that echo each other and repeat across the canvas. So, and it's the same thing even with the figures and the interiors. I'm not trying to tell a story here. It's just, that we had a dinner party, then she took her clothes off. It's none of this narrative stuff. It's totally in your head. I never ever thought of anything like that. I am just really, really, first of all, I love drapery. So this is a whole big story. Drapery, it's the entire universe is in drapery because drapery is gravity. There's really nothing to it except gravity. It falls, it's like all of us, we fall. We're all subject to the laws of gravity, but we have a lot of energy to work against it. But a fabric just doesn't. It just does what it does because of gravity. And that sense of weight and the beauty of light, because when light falls on things, anything looks beautiful because the light falls on it. Things may have no interest in terms of color or shape, but when light falls on it, the geometry of the pattern that is created by light and shadow makes anything beautiful. In addition, there's all the subtleties of white. So I'm very interested in color. Everything that we see is just shapes of color, and colors have an effect on each other. And the smaller the nuance of color, the more thrilling it is to me. The finer the change of color, it means that I'm seeing more discreetly, with more power, I guess. And so white is the color where you can see that the most. Anyway, what's interesting to me in the table paintings is that there's a cluttered mess, and as I said earlier, the subject is very far away from me. It's several rooms away, so I can see the whole thing. I can stand as far away as I can. So I can't really see the objects. They're too far away, my eyes aren't very good. And it's just a lot of clutter and glitter. Supported by a table, but they're not falling. The table has prevented gravity from acting, so they're all just glittering on the top of the table, and then the drapery is allowed to fall. And to me, it's a really breathtaking contrast of clutter and then this smooth flow. So that's what I see when I look at the painting. I don't see, oh, well, this is leftover, and how many people were drunk, and who's in the other room and left her dress behind and all that stuff. It's strictly, colors and shapes. Okay, so the selection of a motif, you wake up every day and look around and say, okay, what is there to paint? And it's all colors and shapes, but things aren't necessarily interesting until you put a rectangle around them. As soon as you put a rectangle around something, it becomes important, first of all, because it's framed, and I'm not talking about the painting, I'm talking about in life. You look around and think, well, there's an interesting pattern of shapes. As soon as I find the rectangle, there's the boundaries create a tension because there's something to push against. So everything going on in there suddenly has something to hit off the edge, and there's all this dynamic comes in. It's kind of like limits create action. Where if there's no boundary on the painting, things are kind of soft. I guess like a balloon. There's just air, but when it's in a balloon, it's very tense, all that air in there. So the first step of finding a motif is really just going around looking for this little rectangular viewfinder in the world. And usually there's just some, I don't even know how to describe it, some color event, this color against that color, like okay, well this is, radishes already are an event. They come that way. They're red and green. It's ridiculous. They just like, what? You just go to the grocery store and they're already going to be a painting no matter what you do with them because they're red and green, right? And they have those little tails. At least in the grocery store in France. I'm not sure how they're sold here, but they're kind of live and just picked. So they have those little tails. So they're like fish or something. They're just very, very alive. In fact, everything is alive to me. I mean, all inanimate objects are alive because while I'm looking at them, they are moving. And they're moving because my eyes are moving. So when I look over here, they're over here, and when I look over here, they jump over here. So they're always moving, and they're also always moving with respect to the other objects because there are spaces in between objects, and so they suddenly have all kinds of relationships. Anyway, I just look at something and then I say, how about this color drapery? I put it on some color drapery. Okay, that's an interesting color juxtaposition or not. And if not, I'll put it on something else, and then usually, sometimes I find a painting. It's already set up. Well, that's called landscape, because you can't really change the drapery color. You'd have to wait a few months, and maybe the field would change color. But inside in the still life, occasionally something just is. I accidentally put things there, and they look great. But usually there's some, let's just call it tweaking, which means I look at it, yeah, okay, it's there, and then you move one of them over here, or move this there, or move that there, and then something happens, and then it's too heavy over there, and it moves. It's kind of like designing a room, I guess. I just move things around until something goes click, and there's some fit, or some, this is very abstract, but there's just some relationship that feels right. And then a lot of other things have to follow. So they may look as though they were found. They're mostly not found. They were mostly constructed, but not constructed with forethought. Constructed by accidentally, say, well, okay, no, that's not good. No, that's not good. No, okay, how about like that? So I spend like 4 hours arranging the folds and then painting. So it's a ridiculous, it's a ridiculous way to spend one's time. But when they suddenly get in almost the perfectly right relationship, then they're ready. I'm ready to paint because I am so. It's come to this perfect moment of tension and forces working against each other. It's like it has this potential energy in it that makes me want to paint. Like on a spring on a diving board or something like that, and it sends me to want to, enter the battle. Because, okay, so the actual painting, I'm going to put this down here. I'll get a one more mask. Because actually painting, all right, it's not a question of trying to make a picture of something. It's just really trying to figure out my perception. How is it that I'm seeing this? What is going on in my eyes and my brain? How is it that I'm seeing this? And how can the act of perception be translated into this something ridiculous like mud, colored mud? So I don't think of it as constructing a painting. I basically think of it as like jumping into a mud puddle and trying to get out again. That's how the process of painting goes. So I'm not going to demonstrate the process of painting here, but there's a tone ground, and then there's some brushstrokes that basically are the essential energy forces that are going on inside the rectangle. So I don't know, it's like pick some painting here. So okay, so the first strokes here probably went something like this. Okay, there was just a swoop. All right, that tells me how I'm going to function in that rectangle. What is this? What's happening in this rectangle? maybe I went here first, but I don't think so. I think I went up because I can feel this is moving up because it's supported by the chair. Anyway, each painting has a completely different rhythm of energy, and that is the architecture under it, and that is how it starts. Okay, and then I have a palette of just six colors, very basic. It's just the spectrum, because that's all the colors we can see. So we can make all the colors out of the spectrum. And then mostly I start with the what we call the background, which is basically the largest piece of real estate in the painting generally. It's a big area, and it's the space of the painting. It makes the space of the universe. Now, okay, it's really important to me that a painting is convincing, that it convinces you that it's real life, that I really saw this, that this is what I'm perceiving in the live world, which is a three-dimensional world that we can move around in and breathe, and there's air and all of that. It's not a flat picture. So the goal, the first goal is to break the wall of the painting and convince that this is a three-dimensional universe. So the first thing I have to do is get the space back, because you can't have a three-dimensional thing on a flat surface. So I pretty much, it's really important to get that. We call it the background, but really it's just the space of the painting. So background is a little bit of an insult. It kind of devalues that color, shape, area, but actually it's everything. The whole painting is made by that whatever that background shape is in all the paintings. If you want me to talk about specific paintings, well, we'll do that in a minute. Okay. All right, and usually the background makes the space, but it's also a color against which everything is seen. In the same way that the energy forces are seen against a rectangle. All the movements and whatever's going on in there, it's kind of measurable against a vertical and a rectangle, which we have inherently in us, because of our vestibular system. We have this internal vertical and horizontal, so every movement that's happening in the painting, we feel the walls of the rectangle in us, and that really emphasizes the sense of movement. Well, it's the same thing with color. Whatever color is that I establish to be the distance, everything is going to be measured against that, and it come forward a certain distance from that, and that's how it's going to be a convincing universe, because it's the color that's going to make the space. This is why we're all children of Cézanne. It's the color relationships that create the space. And then, but those areas are put down in how shall I say, an extremely messy way. They're not filled in, there's no outlines, there's no drawing, it's just kind of some area here of this color, some area of that color, and it's a big mess. And then some lights go in and some colors go in, and then it's an even bigger mess. And then the rest of the painting is, how do I get out of this mess I've made? Because there's no challenge to drawing it and filling it in. I would just be asleep immediately. Because first of all, I do know how to draw. I drew for thousands of hours when I was a student, and then for the entire rest of my life. So I don't draw. I just start throwing paint around, and it's impossible for the drawing not to arrive. In fact, I prefer that it doesn't arrive. I'm always trying to get rid of the drawing, because it's just going to come, it's always going to come back. I know that doesn't make any sense, but in order for the forms to be really, really three-dimensional, one never wants to overemphasize the contours, because that flattens things out. So the more three-dimensional something is, it's three-dimensional in the middle. You know what I mean? This is the part sticking out the most, not that outside edge. The outside edge is the furthest from you. So, I'm always trying to find the form that's coming forward. And so, drawing implies linear outlines. Of course, there are moments of high contrast, and that brings me to another subject, which is where are you going to focus? because we don't focus on everything. I mean, first of all, we only have a little area that we can focus on with our eyeballs. And in order to see the world, they have to jump around and refocus all the time. You know, I don't know, 7 times per second. I don't know how many times your eyes are jumping around and refocusing. So to make a painting that feels like real visual perception, I have to have moments of focus, but not everything in focus. Everything in focus, then it's like a camera. It's not a human visual experience. It's another kind of seeing. So there's a lot of getting rid of sharp edges. I do this with usually my fingers, so, you know, just getting rid of edges and trying to figure out which ones need to, you know, which ones need to be clear and crisp, and which ones don't. That's not a very good explanation for that either, but, you know, I'm just trying to put this into words. It's not verbal. Okay, so, you know, paint is liquid and plastic in the sense of, you know, movable, not plastic. It's oil paint, but it has plasticity, and it's not really a liquid. It's more of a paste, but obviously it can be moved around. So while the painting is going on, I'm constructing things that are hard-edged in the real world, but I'm constructing them out of liquid and mush. So, you know, there's just a lot of scraping off and working with what kind of edges, what kind of thickness of paint, and it's not, again, premeditated. It's totally trial and error. I mean, you would think after 40 years of, you know, you would think you know how to do it, but actually, no. It's every single painting is, what? I've never done this before. What is this? And it's trial and error. So paint gets put down, it gets taken off. It gets put down, it gets taken off. It gets put down, it gets taken off. It gets put down. Oh, that's it. That's called trial and error. It's not, I know how to do this. I'm gonna just do it because now I know how to do it. That never happens, or maybe once for a second. You know, and I'm sure it could happen, but it's not my painting process, because I would be bored and I wouldn't paint anymore. I mean, the thing that keeps painting exciting is that I have no idea how to do it, because it's impossible. You know, this is the real world, and that's just a flat world of colored mud, and how can I possibly reproduce my perception, my 4 hours of perception with colored mud? I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing to even attempt in the first place. So, you know, the impossibility of it is what keeps me moving forward. All right, what else can I tell you? Do you want to ask me some questions? Yes.
Your paintings are so fresh. I'm just curious how many sessions you spend on each one.
Well, they are, you know, okay. Part of the selection of motif has to do with, you know, my options are greatly reduced because what I'm painting has to stand there for at least a half an hour, if not 2 weeks, right? So everything is not an option. I'm probably not going to paint a rainbow because by the time I set up my painting, it would be gone. You know, so certain, well, glasses and plates, you know, they'll probably stay there for quite a while, and so will a tablecloth. But the cherries aren't going to look good the next day. The stems are going to be brown probably the second day. You know, certain things, the melon rinds, that's going to curl up by the end of the painting. So things are, the time is dictated by the subject, and that dictates the size usually, because I'm just not going to, you know, this just takes a long time to structure. So I'm going to make something smaller because I know that I don't have that much time. Landscape is the quickest, in the sense that whatever's in the landscape is it's about light, and you know, these shadows. I'm lucky if they're there for 20 minutes. You know, that exact moment where I set up under the trees, and the tree shadows. It was in a cherry orchard, and it was freezing in the middle of the summer because the mistral was blowing, the wind was blowing very fiercely. Anyway, those shadows, they just went up the you know, up the gully there and they're lying on the road. I don't know, that was just, I saw that, I said, oh my God, hurry, hurry, hurry. Of course, that can't last very long, so that's a really quick painting. And, you know, I don't generally make it very large if I can tell that it's not gonna last very long. Something, you know, so you don't always know how long something's gonna last. So that's the, I might go back, I mean, maybe I went back a second time to that painting because I can't remember, I may have. So that's a session. A painting like this, it was many, you know, many days, you know, and then some days I hate it and some days I can't, I just go and paint something else and so that's the answer to the question. Session, yeah.
Why does a woman in the orange coat, why didn't she have a face? Tell us about that painting.
Well, this my model, Erica, she's a dear friend of mine, and she's very happy to pose. She loves to come in with different costumes. Oh, I have this orange robe. I said, what, orange?
Is it a robe? It's a robe.
Oh, this is robe. It's terry cloth or something. It's, you know, a kind of orange that doesn't even exist in paint. I don't even think it exists in the real world, you know, bright, bright orange. And right. Anyway, she poses for me. Why, first of all, they're very quick, those studies on paper. Maybe they're 20 minutes each. And I do a lot of them in a row. We just spend the afternoon, she does a 20-minute pose.
Does
and
she
then
stand like that, like that? She stood like
she
that?
stands like that, that's how she poses, those are all her posing. Yeah, yeah, for example. Yeah, so, yeah, she poses and changes costume and then if I really love one of them, then sometimes I do like that larger painting over there of her.
Oh, that's
She-
her in the wedding dress?
Yes, her in the white dress. That I didn't paint from her. I painted from a study, from one of the oil on paper studies. So I mean, I say I always paint from life, okay, but I lied. That one is not directly from life. She didn't hold that pose for weeks and weeks.
So I wanted to ask you, you talked about pushing the paint around. Is that why you chose oil? So you can do that?
No, I was, first of all, I was born into oil paint.
Okay.
You know, I was born as a painter, you know, that's what you paint with, oil,
And
so.
also, what instruments do you use? Do you use sable brushes? Do you use palette knives? When you were talking about, when you were describing this, I have a big mess, you said, and then I need to push it around.
That's right, that's
So what do
exactly
you
what I
use?
do. Yeah.
A paper towel?
No paper towels, never.
I'm teasing you.
No, okay, I use oil paint, you know, this is the question of, materials is very important because that's craftsmanship. And, you know, you can't make anything of quality without craftsmanship. So I have a long relationship with my materials. I use excellent quality materials. Oil paint is a question of chemistry. You have to know how oils dry and what, you know, the pigments are and how they interact with each other and which ones have more oil and less oil and how they're going to, you know, what's going to happen when they meet. I mean, it's a whole story of chemistry.
Right.
So, and I have that background. I studied all of that. So I have the oil paint craft and I love the material. So it's never, I mean, of course I've used acrylic and I've used watercolor and I sculpt, I do lots of other things, but, you know, oil paint is just the material that, it's my instrument. You know, you wouldn't ask a great violinist, you know, why aren't they playing the cello? They just, that's, you know, they could play the cello, but they just play the violin and they've gone a long way with the violin, so they're not really gonna start with another material. Anyway, so the material, if you know, it's very, very versatile. It's one of the great assets. It can be a liquid, an oily liquid. It can be a thick paste like, you know, very impasto, almost like clay. Density, you know, has a great range of qualities. And my tools are standard bristle brushes. They're made from hog hair. I would never use sable because sable is too weak to pick up oil paint. Oil paint is heavy, it's dense. I mean, if you want to appreciate it for its mass, if you just want to use it as oil and glazes, okay, then you could use a soft brush because you could absorb the oil. But if you need to pick it up, which is what it is when it's dense, you need something a little bit more spatula-like, but not exactly a knife. So the bristle brushes are stiff. You know, they're hog hair bristle brushes. They bounce. They have a bounce to them, but they're stiff enough to pick up the paint. Because, you know, the whole act of delivering the paint to the painting, that's the moment where the painting is made, is the, you know, there's the stuff on the palette and it's all wonderful and it's pretty colors and all of that stuff, but what you have to get it to the painting, and then the painting has to receive it. It's kind of like a dance partner. It's very, very important, the delivery and the receipt, the communication between putting the paint on the canvas and the canvas taking it. Because that's when all the expression, I mean, I don't think painting is about self-expression, but everything that one is feeling and thinking and perceiving and saying is communicated at that exact moment when you're delivering the paint. So it's really important that the relationship, so the texture of the linen is important, the brush is important, the paint is important, the brand of paint, the, you know, how dry the priming is, you know, all these things they come into play in the. All right, and then as soon as the paint's down, you know, of course it's going to be wrong because it's trial and error. So, well, sometimes you put it down and you say, wow, I did something right, but usually you're probably going to take that off. But the intent always has to be, at that moment of delivery, the intent is, this is my final word, because I could die in the next moment. Like I never put anything down without delivering it as if it's the greatest thing on earth. Then I can step back and say, oh, that's terrible. But at least it has in it the motive, the feeling that I gave it, because it captured in the brushstroke. Just like when a musician, you know, plays a note, what they're feeling is in that note, and that's how it's delivered. So whatever I was feeling at that moment, it's in the brushstroke, the spirit, you know, and that's why they look alive. That's why the brushstrokes, I mean, I hope I wouldn't present them if they look dead, but they should, every brushstroke is alive because I put it down with that. And if it doesn't have it, I just scrape it off and do it again. And even if I've done it 100 times, the brushstroke doesn't tell you that it's the 100th time, because you would die of boredom and walk out of the room. The brushstroke has to land as if that's the first time I ever thought of that. I just discovered and invented the world. That's how the brushstroke has to be delivered.
You can see that in this one, because you said you were only there for an hour maybe, and you had to get it all done. You
Yeah,
can see what
exactly.
you're talking about in that brushstroke.
Yeah. So actually the time constraint of real life rather than photographs and all that. The time constraint gives me this urgency that isn't otherwise, you know, might not be there. And the urgency gives every brushstroke just a little bit more of a kick, you know, it's like now or never, do or die. And that really gives the painting a lot more life than if I have forever and ever and ever to do it. Because I've gone a long way from materials here, but the only reason, I do use a palette knife constantly, but the palette knife is to take the paint off, not to put the paint on. So I put the paint on, and if that brushstroke is, you know, isn't brilliant, then I take it off right away, because I'm not going to leave anything on there that's bad. Nothing on there can be bad, because that how can I construct? That would be like building a house on quicksand, you know. So there's one bad brick in there, the whole house is going to fall down. So I just get rid of it. I scrape it right off, and so I definitely use the knife all the time, and plus to clean my palette. Yes?
You have a very beautiful energy about yourself when you talk about the work. And I'm hearing you say you have a lot of technical knowledge, you know, paints and things. You mentioned something about it was a trial and error, I never know where it's gonna go or something, you will never learn. But you must have a very strong sense of intuition or trust that the painting will come to you, correct?
Well,
That's through the
no, because you know you've got to go in with doubt, because you know that it would.
Is the excitement for you in the trial and error, or in the trust that, I don't know if I'm making sense.
Well, I think you know, the more you learn to do something, the more intuitive it becomes. So, you know, people are saying, oh, is that intuitive you did this thing? No, it's called learning. I know how to do it, so I don't have to think about it anymore. You do the same thing when you're driving and you're texting and eating and putting on your makeup and stepping on the brake. Like, you know how to drive, so you know how to do that. It's just called learning. So if you don't have to think about it, I don't have to think about the drawing. I don't really have to think about the color. I mean, I have to mix the color, but it's obviously I'm going to see when it's wrong and I know when it's right. So I don't really have to think about that. So, you know, wait, what is the question? Intuitive. I guess, okay, there's a couple of challenges now after this many years. One thing is, I don't always spend very much time on the setup. Like, I used to spend a lot more time making the setup perfect. That doesn't mean the painting was painted, but at least the structure was all there. And then I still have to paint it, but I knew I'm on a very firm structure. Nowadays, I sometimes just start painting when I have not made a good structure. And I say, you idiot, you're just gonna go down the rabbit hole and die. You know, it's like, why are you being so lazy? Make this better. And I said, nah, I'm just gonna see what happens. I'm like, oh my God. So I think one is always challenging oneself, you know, to be on the edge of death. You know, it's like, if I can make a good structure, then now suddenly I don't really want to quite work it all out now. I want to just see what happens when I get into it. And then I'm in big trouble. And then, because there's no structure, then I have to figure out where the structure is. And usually, miracle, you know, I do. Sometimes I do. So that's where I'm at now. So I think, you know, all through my life career of painting, there have been different challenges along the way, and then once you, it's not a challenge anymore, it becomes intuitive. It's people think, you know, oh, what a miracle, you have this gift. I was like, no, thousands of hundreds of millions of hours, and now it's intuitive. So, yes.
So, at least in current day for you, how many, for every painting that you display or it's up for sale, how many do you just either give up on or say that's not good enough?
Well, that's a very interesting thing, because that's a great measure of my progress.
I was going to ask you, how's that compared to?
Yeah, because in earlier days, I would say, you know, probably half of them went into the trash. It's just an average, you know, that's normal. I'm not talking about student days, I know they all went to the trash, but, you know, yeah, half or maybe 60-40, you know, maybe they didn't go into the trash immediately, but it would be soon enough, it would be obvious that they just weren't worth keeping. Or you paint over them, I mean, they don't have to go to the dump, but there is a great satisfaction in razor blades. And you know, when you see that it's not good, there's a wonderful satisfaction in getting rid of the paintings that are not as good, because your whole oeuvre, your whole body of work suddenly gets better. You just get rid of the worst one, your whole body of work just improved. Get rid of the 10 worst ones, you're a genius. So it's very positive. It's not an it's not a negative thing to get rid of the inferior ones. And plus, you know, there's a storage problem. So get rid of the inferior ones. So yes, I have a storage problem now, because as time goes on, there aren't that many that I want to get rid of. Yeah, so I can't really say the percentage, but you know, I'm sure I throw out 20%. Okay, but is there another question? Yeah.
Can you talk about your use of line to support your compositions?
Line.